had street committees in Soweto, in Alex, in Reliance University building. And not once do I remember anybody asking, what are you going to do for me?
Welcome to Crossing the Line, a weekly podcast show in which we talk to guests from various sectors of society about important issues troubling our country, our continent, and our world. My name is Ryland Fisher, and I'm your host. I want to thank Mobilearn for the support that they've given us to make this podcast possible. Thank you very much. My guest today is Cas Coovadia, the Sherpa for B20 South Africa, the official business engagement group of the G20. He was appointed to lead South Africa's hosting of the B20 in 2025 by Business Unity South Africa, BUSA, of which he is the former CEO. Good afternoon, Mr. Coovadia. Welcome. How are you today?
Good afternoon. I'm fine, Ryland, and thanks for having me. Please call me Cas. That's okay.
Thank you. I want to find out what the B20 Sherpa is and also talk about your time at BUSA and the Banking Association of South Africa. But I'd like to go back a little bit in history first. You were a political activist during the struggle against apartheid. And when we became a democracy in 1994, you could have chosen a role in government. I believe that you were quite high up on the provincial legislature list for the ANC in Gauteng, yet you chose business. Why did you take that decision?
Well, Ryland, at that time, myself and a number of colleagues were in the midst of planning to open a low-income bank, a mutual bank called Community Bank. It was the first mutual bank in the country, and the Mutual Banks Act. We actually worked with the registrar of banks at that time, Christo Visa in the Reserve Bank, to write the Mutual Banks Act. And I felt, and I consulted with the ANC at that time, Tokyo Sekwale as the chair of the Southern Transvaal region at that time, and Paul Moshatile as the secretary. And we came to the conclusion that a low-income bank is important. If we can make that work, that's important for the country and important for society. And that all of us can't go into government, and that I should stay with trying to develop the bank. So that's the decision that was taken. I've always felt that my contribution must lead to an improvement in people's lives, must lead to promoting, facilitating the growth of our country. And at that particular point in time, I thought that community bank is quite important.
And so, did you have any business experience before that? I mean, how difficult was the transition from politics to business, or from struggle to business?
Yeah, I didn't have my own business, nor did I work for a corporate other than serving my articles for accounting with auditing firms. I studied my BCom, I served articles, and that was essentially the extent of my private sector experience. Obviously, if I had completed my CA, which I didn't do because of various reasons, including detentions and so on, I might have gone into the private sector, but I didn't. I then was instrumental in forming the community bank, and that was my sort of key role in the private sector at that time. And then since then, I've basically played roles in organized business rather than for a corporate. Because I sort of see my role in organized business as an activist role, that business is an important player in society, has a critical role to play. And I always saw my role as guiding, leading business to play a role which I term broadly sustainable business, which is to do business in a way that contributes to the growth and development of the country as well.
Okay, we can talk a little bit more about that, but I want to know the community bank. You formed it. Is it still around today?
No, it's not. We formed it. We had memory recalls, we probably had about 36,000 housing loans. We had about uh, 500,000 rand worth of SME loans. We had about, I don't remember the numbers now, but quite a few deposited. And the way we modeled it, and that's what a mutual bank is that you deposit for a period of time, and on the back of that, you can borrow money. And as a depositor, you have an ownership of the bank. You get a share certificate.
Mm.
We were initially funded by the big four banks and the IDC. We were successful in that we lent money, we were collecting, and we were getting money back. We worked with unions, we worked with community groups, but we needed wholesale funds. Any bank needs wholesale funds, can't depend only on retail deposits. And even the unions with which we were working as members, we were lending money to, wouldn't put in wholesale funding. They considered it too risky, even though Crystal Visa at that time, the registrar of banks, publicly said that, look, this thing has paid its school fees, it's working, put in wholesale funding, but we couldn't raise that. And so eventually we hived it off to EPSA, which then over a period of time incorporated it into its community banking work. So before before a liquidity problem became a more systemic problem, we thought that we should rather have it off and let a bank run with it.
Yeah, it's a pity. Eh?
It's
So,
a pity. I think it was before its time in many
yeah,
ways.
yeah,
It was during the transitional executive council period.
yeah. So, Cas, I mean, obviously, all of us who were involved in struggle learned some lessons during those days, and some of those lessons we still, or some of those things we still implement today. So, what are some of those lessons that you learned during the struggle years that you can still implement in your day-to-day work today?
Well, I guess some we can implement and some we try to implement. I think what we do implement is I'm firmly of the view that university was great, and some of my political sort of lessons started in university. My contemporaries were people like Praveen Gordon and Zach Yakub and Seth Cooper and others. But the struggle and our participation in the struggle taught us a number of things. One is to think on your feet and to understand context, to be flexible, to differentiate between strategy and tactics. And all of that is critically important in business, and it's becoming even more important. I think that if I look at the discussions we used to have on the Banking Association board and then on the BUSA board, it's about the broader issues affecting the country, and what role business plays in trying to ameliorate those issues. And that means really being strategically oriented, looking at what sort of tactical approaches we take at what point in time, thinking on your feet, being flexible. So all of that has been extremely valuable. I think the other lessons we learned were just our values. We, under very difficult circumstances at that time, did not look to get rich. We volunteered our services. We believed in the democratization of the country. We worked very hard to mobilize and organize people in different communities, and we held ourselves accountable. We used to have lots of donor funding at that time, particularly from places in Europe and other places, and we recognize the obligation we have to actually account for those funds properly. And under difficult circumstances, we did that. And the values we learned that was true sort of Ubuntu at that time. We are because of you. And I remember in all my organizing, and I played a big role in the civic movement at that time as well. We had street committees in Soweto, in Alex, in Reliance, the university building. And not once do I remember anybody asking, what are you going to do for me? It was always, we have our thinking, we have our plans, we have our ideas of what to do about the problems we have. and how can you help us do that?
Mm.
So it was always values that said we all rolled up our sleeves, whether we were activists or whether we were people in those difficult positions suffering the brunt of apartheid. And those are lessons that we seem to have lost. The values, accountability, the taking some of your problems in hand and doing something about them.
Mm.
Uh, and I think those we need to re-earn, if you like. But the other stuff, strategies and tactics, thinking on your feet, flexibility, planning, all have held me in very, very good stead. The role I played in business organization.
Mm. You spent, I think, almost 5 years leading BUSA, and before that, I think 15 years as the MD of the Banking Association of South Africa. Can you maybe reflect on some of the highlights of your time at? Maybe let's start with BASA.
Yeah, so I was asked to join BASA by the then MD Bob Tucker. That was after Community Bank. And banks are critical players in the economy and are critical players in society just because of the role they and it was to a certain extent ironic because in my civic days I used to organize Bond Boy, and now I was representing banks. But what I really concentrated on is to work with bank CEOs, and I must say I had some excellent experiences with CEOs of banks. To work with bank CEOs to understand the role of banks, not through a CSI prism, although CSI is important, but through the prism of how do banks operate in order to increase their market and enable their market to grow and prosper so that in the long term they continue doing business. Okay, and I learned in my business organization years, when I speak to CEOs, I don't want to speak to them about CSI. I want to speak to them about their businesses and what's good for their businesses, but that if they achieve what's good for their businesses in a different way to the way they do business, it actually helps them grow their market in future. It helps them take a longer term view of the business. And that's what I tried to do. So we were instrumental. I mean, we had the first B charter, sector charter in the financial sector, broader financial sector, and included the insurance and assurance industry. We, after negotiation, in fact, we at NEDLAC, after negotiations, offered the financial sector. We weren't forced into it. We offered it. And we had the first charter council, which included government, the financial sector, black representatives in the financial sector, labor and community group. And we started implementing the charter. It took a lot of work, took a lot of hard work, took a lot of transformation in those institutions. But I think that it wasn't just a tick box exercise. I think what these institutions learned from them is that there is a market out there that's not addressed. And one of the things I also did at BASA was we formed at the Banking Association an organization called Funmark Trust, which we then, at the point in time, hived off as an independent Section 21 at that time, now a not-for-profit company. And Funmark Trust has become the go-to place for research and development on financial inclusion. And when I started at the Banking Association, we probably had about, I don't know, 25 or 30 people, or 30% of bankable people in the system. We now have close on to 85, 90% in this. And we formed the Mzansi bank account at that time, a low-income savings account for people, which was successful, but then happened, and that's exactly the point. The Mzansi account was never meant to be a single account for poorer people. It was meant to be a trailblazer on the back of which banks then developed a range of products for the low-income market. And that's exactly what's happened. So today, all major banks have community banking divisions looking at different ways of banking the unbanked. They're looking at different ways of working in the informal sector. They're looking at different ways of reaching out to people. So it's no longer bricks and mortar. It's smartphones. It's point of sale devices. It's a whole range of other. So I think that to me the highlights were that the banking sector got from a particular point in place where the exposure to low income was very low, where low income people's exposure to the banking system was very low, and we've actually increased that substantially. And banks have developed all sorts of products to do that. I think also when we started working on some of the broader issues, so when during the Zuma years when he appointed the weekend minister, it was the banking sector actually mobilized to say we need to meet with Zuma. And we need to tell him this. We're not going to tolerate. We want Praveen. And it was primarily banking CEOs, although others joined them, who went to go and see Zuma. And then it was significant involvement of banking CEOs when we put together the CEO initiative with Praveen to get CEOs mobilized to help make a difference in the country. And we went on joint roadshows and so on. So the banking sector, and up till now actually, has played a critical role in the broader issues that we need to deal with in partnership with government. And there were a number of banking CEOs who marched in Victoria when we marched against Zuma. So I think that I've always been of the view, I mean, don't have undue expectations from business. Businesses are businesses. They're there to make profit. They're there to service their shareholders, but also broader stakeholders. And that's what they're there for. Enable them to do that, but enable them to do that in a way that actually benefits broader range of.
And so, what were some of the major challenges that you faced in your time at BASA?
Well, look, this was sort of new stuff, right? I mean, the initial reaction was, well, look, we can't do this. We're not structured to do this. It's too risky, blah, blah, blah. We were able to work at that time with the finance department. I mean, Trevor was, in the early days, Trevor was minister. We were able to work with SARS when Praveen was there to look at what environment is needed to enable all of this to happen. So we were able to pull together a broad range of stakeholders to actually look at this. And over a period of time, because we continued to push that to say that what we're talking about is an investment in new markets, not a cost, an investment in new markets. And we eventually convinced bank CEOs and others. And that took hard work, but I think it bore fruit. I think the other challenge was also, I mean, the financial sector charter council, difficult baby. But again, we persevered and were there, and then we had to, work with civil society unions, Communist Party in the Red October campaign, and others to try and convince them that what we're doing is the right thing. And particularly given my background, that I wasn't sort of selling out. And I mean, when the Communist Party launched its first Red October campaign, it was a campaign against a bank. And Blade was there as the general secretary, and I picked up the phone to Blade and said, look, I understand what you're doing and you need to do it, but let's just plan this thing properly so that people aren't blocking people from going to banks. People are protesting properly. Let us know where you want to protest. We'll make sure bank leadership is there to receive petitions and so on, so on. And it worked well because I felt that from the right thing to do to mobilize, to bring these things to the fore, but do it in a way that doesn't impact negatively on the work we're trying to do in this sector.
Maybe let's do the same that we just did for BASA. Let's look at BUSA. So some of your major achievements while you were at BUSA.
So BUSA was when I left BASA, I left with the intention of retiring. Okay, and Mike Brown from Redbank was the BASA chair at that time, and I told Mike, I don't want to go any other. I believe it's time to now hand over. And I left the Banking Association on the 31st of March 2020. in the meantime, what happened is that chair and deputy chair of BUSA, Sipo Pichana and Martin Kingston, and I served on the BUSA board them representing BASA. They approached me and they said, "Yes, look, just give us 2 years. Just position BUSA properly, ensure it's a credible business voice and so on." And then they tell me, and we've spoken to Mike about it. So I turned to Mike. I said, "Mike, look, I told you I don't want to join another organization." So Mike said, "Look, yes, if you have the energy, if you can position BUSA properly, it's good for all of us. So, if you do it with our blessings."
Mm.
And so I joined BUSA, and I think have positioned it well with a good team there, with a good board. It's now a credible business voice. BUSA is essentially the body that has formed Business for South Africa, that's in partnership with government. BUSA formed it during COVID. BUSA has very, very good relationships with global and local players. It is a robust partner to government. So we're not the government sweethearts, but we understand that government needs capacity and so on. Let's try to structure that properly. And we're doing that through B4SA, but we also criticize government publicly if we need to, when we need to. But those 2 years then became 4 because they felt they hadn't found a CEO yet. And then at the beginning of January 2025, I was approached to go till the end of 2025. And I did that on one condition, that we announce that I will retire at the end of 2025 and that we announce a CEO designate. And Kuvekani Mate, who was with me in the Banking Association, came over to BUSA about 3 years ago now. And we announced him as CEO designate. We announced I'm retiring out in the public space. And on that basis, I said, okay, I'll give it another year. And again, I really meant to retire when I was asked to be the Sherpa for the B20 Bible.
Mm.
I'm giving it another year.
Okay. I suppose you've kind of touched on some of the major challenges, but are there any other major challenges that you encountered at BUSA?
Yeah, about 3 years ago, BUSA board had a serious discussion on what role does the business play in the context of that time. And remember, at that time, just post-Zuma, or not just post-Zuma, but after Zuma, we had load shedding. We had a serious problem we have in logistics. And there were essentially 3 options. One was that we go to the president, tell Mr. President, sorry, we can't work like this. We stepping aside, we pulling back. And when things are right, we'll invest. And we quickly came to the conclusion that that means from the edge of the precipice, we would jump as a country. Second was to go to the president and say, look, Mr. President, what are your priorities? Where can we help? We came to the conclusion quickly that we'd land up with a lot of priorities and not really make progress. And understandably, the president has a lot of priorities. Third was to say that we go to the president and say, Mr. President, these are the priorities we believe are important for both business and the country. Are you prepared to work with us on this in a structured way? And that's what led to this partnership.
Mm.
It wasn't easy, it was up and down, but eventually we got it and we started concentrating on energy, law and order, and logistics. And so this partnership, I mean, if you look at people from business involved in it, so each of those three streams are headed up by CEOs who spend a lot of time on it, are the champions for those time. We have people like Adrian Gore and Martin Kingston and Tulisi and Gojo. I was there when I was at BUSA. Martin was deputy chair, essentially started this. I've stepped back as I should. Kuzakani is now taking over as CEO of BUSA, but Martin has asked me with Kuzakani's blessing to remain on the steerco of B4SA, which I do. But we business has put in a significant amount of resources, and we were absolutely clear that this isn't an initiative where business wants to be involved ad infinitum. We said these are 3 critical issues. we need to build the capacity of the state to actually do what the state needs to do to manage these issues. And our agreement with the president was that government would identify the sort of capacity they need. So for NECOM, for instance, the National Energy Crisis Committee, with which we started this, the presidency identified the sort of people they need. We, through an open RFP process, invited interest. We have a committee of procurement specialists seconded by corporates who go through and chaired by Andrew Donaldson, ex-National Treasury, and they go through this process. And NBI, which has worked with government through TEMDEV, where they put in people in local government and so on, does all the backroom work. And in that way, we put in about 30 people into NICO. Okay, and they're doing their work. They're not accountable to us. They're accountable to the presidency, just to ensure that our funders know what we're doing with the money. We get a report once a quarter to say how things are going, and we report to our funders. And similarly, we're now starting to do that in logistics. And we will, law and order is a bit more difficult because of the nature of the stuff, but we're doing work with the NPA, doing work on the 10111 line and others. And we're absolutely clear that there's a period of time for this. We expect government to institutionalize the capacity we are providing so that government can take over and run with this thing. We don't want, it shouldn't be the role of business to do. Okay. But we're doing it because the capacity issue, because we need to increase confidence in the country. We need to get things to work. Not to say business has all the answers, but business is in a position to raise the resources to provide capacity that government identifies.
Okay.
And that's what.
Yeah. Okay, I see we have a question. BITF, APSIP, and BMF were formed to represent the folks excluded in the past. Are they still relevant? Did they deliver value to the members? I don't know if you can comment on that.
Yeah, so I can't, I don't have any interaction. APSIP is still there, BMF is still there, and I have no doubt they're doing good work. I think it's still relevant to have representatives who ensure that previously disadvantaged people do have a fair stake in the economy.
Yeah.
But I think, and so I don't know what they're doing and how they're doing because I'm not involved, but they are still there, and I think they have a relevant role to play. But I think that in my view, those roles have got to be played. It's not empowerment and transformation or economic growth. It's got to be both.
Yeah.
And empowerment, the way we manage empowerment and transformation has got to promote and contribute to economic growth. Otherwise, it'll be in a zero-sum game. And again, we need to understand the context, we need to understand how we actually position things and how we work with it. But as I said, involved in those organizations.
Okay, so you started talking about the work that you're doing, I think the B20 work. What is a B20 Sherpa? What are the expectations of you? What are your deliverables? How would you know you've been successful or not?
Yeah. So the Sherpa is an odd term. It's a B20. It's a G20 term. So the different streams of the G20 use it. Not to put too fine a point on it, it's essentially the CEO of the B20. Okay, Sherpa guide the process.
But is that so? That would be CEO of the B20, not only for South Africa, but obviously for
South Africa is a host.
Yeah.
So our responsibility of the B20 is to manage this process so that we bring into play the views and positions of business organizations and C-suite people in all the G20 countries. And so we do represent businesses.
So how would you know you've been successful?
Okay, so our theme is inclusive growth and prosperity in a cooperating world. We felt that as a business body, inclusive growth is important. That leads to prosperity. And given where the world is currently, we felt to emphasize that it should be in a cooperative world was important. We have 8 task forces. The whole purpose of the B20 is at the end of the day, make recommendations to the G20 governments from G20 businesses on regulatory and policy environments to achieve inclusive growth, prosperity, and creating a cooperating world. So the one measure of success would be to come out, and we set ourselves a target that it shouldn't be more than 2, maximum 3 recommendations per task force. We've also set a KPI that says that we want those recommendations to be implementable. So we will say, here's the recommendation. This is what needs to be done. And this is who needs to implement it. Now, usually what happens is that the G20 governments, if they accept a recommendation, would expect a multilateral organization to implement. So we'll try to identify that organization. And what hasn't happened in the B20 before is that we haven't been able to track whether those recommendations, firstly, are accepted and secondly, are implemented. So one of the other KPIs we set for ourselves is to work with our successors. We hand over to America then. And we've been talking to the American Chamber of Commerce in Washington when we hand over, and not just when we hand over, but in fact, I had a meeting with one of their deputy vice presidents earlier today. She's in town to say, get involved with us from now so that we can work out a mechanism on how to track these things next year and the year thereafter, and try to form some sort of a mechanism where we track this through all B20 iterations. Now, we need to do this because neither the B20 nor the G20 has a permanent secretary. Essentially, the host country does what it wants to do. So we want to try and see if we can establish something. The other measure of success would be, as a recommendation that come out, we want to work with organizations in the country as well as the government to see how do we implement some of those in our country, okay, and set up a process to do that. Because I've been at pains to tell people that the recommendations that come out are not South African recommendations, are not even African recommendations, although we have tried to make this an African B20. They are B20 recommendations. So they apply to all businesses in the G20 countries. Now, the way to try and influence this process is that we've tried to get as many good, strong people, South Africans, into these task forces as possible so that they can participate in the debates and they can try to keep some of the South African issues alive. But they'll be couched, at the end of the day, the recommendations are B20 recommendations. We've been very lucky, worked at it, but we're fortunate that we've got excellent set of chairs, South African CEOs for each of these task forces. And each of these task forces have support from knowledge partners and from network partners like the World Bank and others. And there's a deputy chair, and then there's 8 to 12 co-chairs coming from all the G20 countries. And it's up to these chairs to manage the process. And you're going to laugh because everybody laughs when I say this. We've managed to limit each task force to 200 people.
Yeah, sure.
Brazil had between 150 and 200. All right.
Sure.
These are large task forces because we need to accommodate all the G20 countries. We also want to accommodate people from the rest of the country. And so the chairs and deputy chairs and the co-chairs' work is to manage this process so that when the recommendations come out, they're worth the paper they're written. You don't get into consensus paralysis. You don't get into lowest common denominator issues. And that's why we're fortunate that we have very good and strong chairs. So that's the process. And the other KPI, I mean, we had the launch in February, and particularly some of the global participants at the launch who came, and those who have been involved in B20 processes for many years, tell us that it's the best B20 launch they've attended. So we set the bar high. We want this to be the best B20 that's ever been had. But we are also working with government. We want to collaborate with the G20 as much as we can, so that this is an excellent year for SA Inc., not just for business, but for SA. So, right now we are busy with managing those task forces. Sort of inception documents have been formed. They've gone into the task forces. There'll probably be about 4 or 5 iterations of that. By end of May, June, we want to arrive at some sort of a reasonable draft, which we will then fine tune. And then at the end of August, sort of beginning of September, we want to hand that over to our president. And then September, October, we want to use an advocacy period to advocate for to the G20 countries, including to our government. We formed the South African Business Advisory Group that gets regular reports and looks at the documents as they come out. That will also help us advocate with our government. And we've got an international business advisory caucus with global CEOs, past chairs of B20s and others, who will help us advocate with other G20 countries.
So, Cas, maybe let's talk about the elephant in the room. I mean, you talk about your theme, kind of talking about inclusivity and so on. You're handing over to America at the end of the year. What has been the kind of, what is the relationship with business in America? Because obviously the relationship with government in America is a bit tense at the moment. And how does business in America feel about inclusivity as being part of a theme when we know that DIE is a kind of a big thing?
So our counterparts in America are the American Chamber of Commerce in Washington, that represent significant parts of American business. They have been extremely supportive. And at our launch, they were there. Some American businesses were there. Myself and my head of secretariat were in Washington about 3 weeks ago. We met MasterCard, who's a sponsor. We met the World Bank. We met the IFC, IMF, the American Chamber of Commerce, Brookings Institute, and others. And the message we got from business was a very positive. Washington is not a nice place to be. That may be quite clear. I think business is very jittery. There's a lot of uncertainty. The message I got consistently is, you need to be careful about how you position things, how you message things, which is not a good place to be. But what I also got is that, given the conditions, this is probably a very, very important B20, because it gives us the opportunity to bring business organizations from the B20 countries together to see how we do things differently. How do we form different alliances? So people in Europe have spoken to me and said, look, yes, there are North and South issues, but here the lines are blurred because he's got tariffs against us and he's got tariffs against you. How do we work together now? How do we jack up how we work to actually achieve? So president of the International Chamber of Commerce is an Australian guy by the name of John Denton. He's a co-chair on the Finance and Infrastructure Task Force. Keeps on telling me, and I met with him again yesterday, he says, guess what? And they represent millions of businesses across the world, the International Chamber of Commerce. We don't need to cock a snoot at America. But America, from a trade point of view, is about 13 to 15% of global trade. The B20 has got to make sure that the other 85% be very successful. That the other 85% that wants to collaborate, that wants to build inclusive economy, wants to do this in a way that cooperates with each other. That's what we concentrate on. If the Americans want to join us, they join us. If they don't, they don't.
But surely, I mean, America is taking over at the end of the year. And,
and
you run the risk of him undoing all the good work that you've done.
Well, the American Chamber of Commerce takes over. They're fully behind this.
Okay.
So they've got to drive it. Now, look, let's not kid ourselves. They have to work in a particular environment. They'll have to work with their G20 Sherpa next year as well, whoever their G20, depending on to what extent America gets involved in the G20 for that matter. So it's not going to be an easy road for them, but they are fully behind the theme. They are fully behind making this implementable and tracking that. as I said, I met one of the vice presidents here this afternoon, earlier this afternoon, and it's fully behind us. So we're going to put our heads down, make this a very successful B20, come out with implementable recommendations. We leave the politics to the politicians, but at the time we hand over the recommendations, if the political situation is such that it militates against some of those recommendations being met or being implemented, we will comment on that. We will say that we note this and we will talk about the implications of those recommendations not being okay. So that's but right now we got our heads down, getting the task forces working. They're working hard, and we want to get those recommendations.
So, Cas, what happens at the end of this year? You step down. Uh, I mean, are you retiring or are you taking
I,
another challenge?
Okay, so look, I'd like to retire. At the very least, I'd like to sort of do things in my own time, not work full time. Uh, uh, but I've always taken the view that so long as I'm healthy enough and I can play a role, I'll play a role if I can add value. But
Mm,
I think that people need to start taking up the baton and running with it. Uh, um, so yeah, so I haven't planned anything. I'll probably sit on a couple of boards, not more than two major boards. I don't want to be a serial non-executive director. I think that's silly. And then just do something that I want to do, including working with some NGOs and so on.
mm,
But we'll see. We'll see. I mean, both the BUSA one and the B21 came at very short notice. I was
yeah.
at the last BUSA board meeting. The chair said, "Look, let's say farewell to you here, but the real farewell will come," and there has been a farewell. And then the next breath, he says, "Listen, you talk to us about the B20 and so on." And tell the board, "I don't think there's anybody better suited than the guy on my right."
Mm.
That's what happened. And I said, "Well," he said, "we got to talk about it." He said, "No, we'll talk about it, but I just want to put it on the table."
Yeah. All of us have had kind of ups and downs in terms of our relationship with our country over the past probably 2 decades or so.
Yeah.
Are you positive or negative about the future of our country?
No, I'm positive. The more I travel, the more convinced I am. There's no better country in the world,
Mm,
and I say that without any hesitation.
yeah.
I'm very positive about our country. I think we have resilient
Mm,
people. Having said that, I think we need to stop shooting ourselves in the feet. There are things we can avoid that we do. And we need to understand the context in which we're working. We also need to understand nobody owes us anything. We've got to do things for ourselves and we've got to do it properly. There's some hard choices to be made, and we need to make those choices. I think that at the political level, I think Cyril has done well. I think he needs to now, take up the cudgels together with his colleagues in the GNU, and they've got to make this GNU work
mm,
because it's raised confidence. I think it has the potential of working. Of course, it will have lots of challenge. The moment we form that, they must have known it will have lots of challenge. But I think we need some real strong leadership. I think that to a certain extent, what's happening in America is an opportunity for us to say, what do we need to do? So one of the task forces we have is industrial innovation and transformation. That's a task force that we added this year because we believe it's important for South Africa and the continent. And
mm,
I think we need to look at that within the context of, I think, the opportunity that the situation in America presents. And
yeah.
how do we show leadership in this country to also show leadership for the continent? How does a continent come together to look at how it industrializes, how it value adds, how it exports processed stuff rather than materials, and its relationships with our major trading partners? And I think we can do that. So I'm optimistic, not with rose-tinted glasses. Lots of work to do. There'll be lots
Yeah.
of ups and downs, but certainly in my role at business and the role I've been playing for the last few years, I think business generally is optimistic and confident about the country. I mean, they don't need to do what they're doing, and I'm certainly very optimistic about it.
So we've spoken a lot about the role of business, the role of government in solving the problems in our country, As a former political activist, you probably understand the need for people to also be involved. And so, how do we develop the kind of active citizenry necessary to hold to account those in power?
No, that's why I think civil society is critical. I mean, I think the sort of work people like the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation do. I actually had lunch today with the CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation to understand what they're doing, and I think those are critical. I think a lot of the civil society organizations are critical, hold business and government to account. Uh, but again, I think that I still get the feeling that some civil society organizations conduct themselves as if we're still in the 1980s, and it's a very different environment. I can't organize like I used to do by having street committees and flag committees. You organize electronically nowadays. You organize in other ways. You can't respond to this government like you responded to the apartheid government, whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not. This is a democratically elected constitutional government. And you've got to have a different approach to this government than you had to the apartheid government. And I think the same applies to the labor movement. So I think that in the labor movement, I mean, the world of work has changed and will continue to change. Whether you like it or not, that train has left. You're not going to say, no, in South Africa, we're going to do things differently. It's not going to happen. How do you respond to that? How do you organize? What are the issues? What are the priorities? And those are the sorts of questions that need to be asked in civil society. But I think it's absolutely crucial. And if we don't have a strong civil society, if we don't have a strong media, you can see what's happening.
Yeah.
It's not, I'm not divulging. You read about and see it on TV all the time. We don't want a situation in our country where we try to clamp down on universities, where we clamp down on, protests and activism. And so it's important. And that's made our struggle such a tremendous struggle. That was always part of our struggle. It wasn't just political. I mean, the civic movement organized around people's day-to-day issues and tried to improve their life. And we need to continue doing it.
So I sometimes call myself an expired activist. Would you call yourself an expired activist, or are you still an activist?
No, I think I'm still an activist in different ways. I don't have the energy to do what I used to do today. I mean, I used to do in those days. I still try to speak to people, younger people who are active. I was on the Wits Council during the Fees Must Fall stuff, and I was down what is now Solomon Maklangu. Down with Adam Habib and a few others, 3,000. Tried to talk to them. So yeah, I don't overplay my role. Where I can help, where I can bring some of the experiences to bear, absolutely want to do that, because we still got a lot of work to do in this country.
So finally, what message would you give to young people who look up to you, and especially those from disadvantaged communities? What can they do to put them on the path to achieve even half of what you have achieved in life?
Whatever I have achieved to the extent I have has been done over 40 odd years during the struggle days and my organized business. It's been hard. And so a message is that you've got to have a goal. You've got to work toward that goal, but it's hard. You've got to work hard. The message I would like to send is that, yesterday I was at the launch of the V20, the values, talking about Ubuntu and so on. Well, we've got to ask ourselves whether we really practice Ubuntu for the younger people, practice that Ubuntu. I could never have been where I am. I didn't have excellent people to work with, both people reporting into me and people I report. People I could talk to, mentors that I could talk. And so, talk to people, take people's advice, understand that it's hard work. It's not, and the goal shouldn't be to become a millionaire. The goal should be to be successful and in a way that you can wake up every morning and look at yourself and feel good about it. And the money will come. somebody the other day asked me, so listen, I guess if you work for corporates all this time, you would have been much a very, very rich man. I said, it's never something that drove me. I have a comfortable life. I'm not. But what drove me is to work in organizations to make a difference. What drives you could be that you want to become a CEO of a corporate. And that's great. Go for it. But don't expect it to come easy. Work hard. Work ethically. Bring up people with you. Don't trot on people as you go up. And always remember that. And there's still another thing that I learned in the civic. Not varsity, struggle, nothing taught me more than ordinary people who were suffering the brunt of apartheid and who knew what to do about
Yeah.
it. And don't forget.
Thank you, Cas, for being an interesting and informative guest. Thank you to Mobilearn.
Thank you.
Thank you to Mobilearn for their invaluable support. Thank you for the technical staff who do things behind the scenes to make me look good. Thank you for the guests who joined us online. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and TikTok. Thank you for watching Crossing the Line. We welcome your input so that we can improve the show. If there are any guests that you think we should invite on the show, please let us know. My name is Ryland Fisher, and it has been a pleasure hosting Crossing the Line. Until we meet again, goodbye.